Hello, this is Daphne Elliott, and I am teaching my little Kevin about discharge. So, contract discharge is when there's agreement or contract between two parties, and a person is liable to perform duties of the contract until they are discharged. We're just going to discuss a few ways that you can be discharged from an agreement in case you're ever in contract that you want to get out of. So the first one is by performance. So of course, the easiest way to be discharged from a contract is if you perform what you promised to perform. There's also a substantial performance, which is where you performed everything to the best of your ability, but like maybe you hired a contractor and they had some small imperfections or something like that, like maybe the outlet was crooked or little tiny things like that. They're gonna any court would say that was substantial performance, and then they would say that obviously they're not going to hold them legally liable for that small of a thing. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Then there is by non-performance or breach. Now that one is not the ideal way to be discharged from a contract, because in that case you could be held legally liable for any ramifications that happen due to you not performing what you said you were performing. And then there's part of the non-performance breach is sometimes there's an anticipatory breach, like maybe you see in advance that you're not going to be able to fulfill your promise and contract. So then at that time, you have to be clear though. If somebody comes to you and they say, "Hey, it's going to be really hard for me to finish by this deadline," that doesn't count as an anticipatory breach. They have to say, "I'm not going to complete the project." If they say that, then you're able to go out and do what you need to do, seek monetary payments or whatever to compensate for them not being able to make your deadline. And then there are conditions. So we're probably familiar with a lot of conditions, but they're a special kind of stipulation. They can be held in a contract. It's an event that the happening or not happening of which it'll give rise to a duty to be performed or not performed. They can be expressed, implied, precedent, or subsequent. So an express condition is going to be real easy. It's usually going to be in the contract that you're signing. It's going to be oral or written. So you're going to know this is a condition, right? And then there's also implied conditions. So those are just like understood. So like start payment. It's understood that you're not going to pay for what they do until they finish the job. That's implied. Yeah. Then you have a condition of precedent, which is when something must happen before the party owes performance. So like if you want to install new windows in your house, you might accept the contract in condition of finance, and that would be precedent. Yep. And then there's subsequent conditions, which is like, maybe you're already doing something, but whenever something else happens, you're going to stop. So the example in our book was like maybe you have an agreement to nanny some kids until their mom comes back from deployment. And then that would be the condition that you would stop doing the performance. All right. And then there's by agreement. So there could be like a mutual rescission. Both parties can say, "Hey, I don't want to do this anymore." And then at that time, you draw up an agreement, say, you're released from your duties, and we agree not to sue each other. Gotcha. That one's all good. And then there can be like a waiver of rights. And in this scenario, maybe a party waives their right in the agreement, but doesn't release the other party from their obligations. So maybe like the textbook example was like if you are supposed to turn in an assignment by a certain time, and you email the teacher and say, "Hey, God, I can't make it, on this deadline." And then the teacher can, if they decide to take the work late, they're waiving their right to fail you. And then but you're not released from the obligation to turn it in still. Make sense? Yeah. All right. And then there is by operation of law. So this one is when there's two different ones. It's whenever the performance becomes impossible or impractical. And the impossible ones are usually like if there is death or incapacity of the service provider. Obviously, they're not going to be able to fulfill the contract if they can't. And then there's destruction of a thing that's necessary for performance, like a key tool or something like that. And then performance that's prohibited by law. Like maybe there's a new law that came out that you can't do that. And then the impractical is like maybe if they're dealing with a problem and there's unforeseeable circumstances that you didn't agree, you didn't see in your agreement, right? And a lot of times that can be an act of God or something like that. Like if you had an agreement for somebody to remodel your home and maybe a tornado knocks it all the way down, they aren't going to be able to. That's not reasonable. All right. And that was our teaching today. You have any questions? Nope. Questions? No questions. Stop the recording.